Okay, Alexander, let's do a follow-up with the border crisis between Poland and Belarus. And things are escalating. They're taking a turn for the worse. And we have Warsaw warning Minsk about the fact that they're, quote unquote, weaponizing and engaging in a hybrid war, weaponizing the migrants and engaging in a hybrid war. We have Warsaw, the Polish prime minister actually is accusing Putin and Russia of orchestrating all of this. Once again, the masterful Vladimir Putin is moving his pieces around the chessboard to push migrants into Poland to destabilize the European Union because I don't know. I don't quite understand it. But anyway, all right. All right. Maybe Putin's thinking on a much, larger, grander level than I could possibly hope to. But you have Ukraine tightening its border as well, and they're kind of jumping on the bandwagon here to demonize Russia, of course, and to poke at Belarus. And of course, you have Lukashenko fighting back and pushing back and saying, you know what, we're not going to take any of this. We don't. He says, first of all, we don't really have the resources to hold all of these migrants that the EU used to at one point in time pay us to hold, but now because of sanctions doesn't pay us to hold. So we don't have the resources to keep these guys in our country. So we're letting them loose. But Lukashenko is also defiant as well. And Angela Merkel spoke with Vladimir Putin. Lukashenko spoke with Vladimir Putin as well. Ursula von der Leyen is warning everybody, not that I doubt anybody is taking her seriously, but she's in on the game as well, talking about sanctions. And actually, Reuters, to finish it up, Reuters came out with an article just moments ago which said that the EU is very, very close to implementing more sanctions on Belarus because the sanctions worked so well the first, second, and third time that I'm almost positive this fourth and fifth time, those sanctions will finally push Belarus to want to enter the European Union. And not only will Belarus want to enter the European Union because of the sanctions, Alexander, I'm sure that Turkey will also want to enter the European Union and that the Kremlin government will fall and Russia will be liberated from Vladimir Putin, all because of Ursula von der Leyen's fifth or sixth sanctions placed on Belarus. The whole thing is nonsense. We did a video on this the other day. We posted it. What's the follow-up to all of this activity going on? Are you worried that conflict may break out?
No, I'm not worried that the conflict will break out, but I will say straight away that there are some people in Europe who seem to be going out of their way to talk up this crisis for all it's worth. I mean, there are some ridiculous things now going on. Now, let me make this absolutely clear. I don't think Poland should accept these people. I think that's absolutely inappropriate. That's completely wrong. I think that the Poles should stand firm and say these people are not, refugees in any true sense of the word, and we're not taking them. And they should take steps to seal their border and build fences and build all those sort of things. Like, by the way, dare I say it, Donald Trump did in the United States. Remember that? So, I mean, I think, and got criticised for doing, but I think the Poles should be doing the same thing. But of course, they're going far beyond just doing things like that, which are proportionate and necessary in this situation. They're deploying tanks. What are those tanks there for? I mean, this is ludicrous stuff. I mean, are they going to invade Belarus? Do they think Belarus is going to invade them? I mean, the whole thing is just nonsense. And then we have the Polish Prime Minister coming along to the Polish Parliament and saying, this is Mr. Putin, he's in charge, he's in control of everything, as you correctly said. He's clearly playing a game of not just 5-dimensional or 6-dimensional, but 500-dimensional chess. I mean, I have no idea what this Putin plan would be to achieve this. I mean, that just doesn't make any sort of sense at all. So the result is Lukashenko now telephones Putin and gets Putin's support, by the way. The Russians have been quite clear that they support Lukashenko. They say the solution to this, and the Russians are not saying the European Union should be taking these people. What the Russians say is that if you pay Erdogan to hold your refugees, you should pay Lukashenko or Belarus to do the same. I mean, it's logical. It's the obvious thing to do. Otherwise, why would Belarus put itself out when it's been sanctioned in this fashion? It's not what they want to do, of course. They don't want to talk to Lukashenko. They don't want to do a deal with him because, of course, as you correctly say, they're trying to overthrow him. So what do? They call Vladimir Putin instead. And what is Vladimir Putin going to tell Angela Merkel? Well, I haven't yet had time to read the readout. As we speak, I don't think the Kremlin has yet published one. But I'm going to make an absolute prediction about what he said. He's going to say to Angela Merkel, Angela, this has absolutely nothing to do with me. You're calling the wrong man. The person you should be calling is Lukashenko in Minsk. I'm not here making these kind of decisions. I mean, and that's the obvious thing they need to do. It seems to me that Lukashenko is ready for a deal. I mean, he's that kind of a character. I'm not saying he's playing an innocent game here. I understand there's been all sorts of, travel agencies across, the Middle East saying, go to Belarus and you get into the European Union. And no doubt he's played some role in letting that happen. I understand many of the airlines, by the way, that are shipping these migrants from the Middle East into Belarus are actually Turkish and Arab. Just hold on to that thought for a moment. But, I'm not saying that Lukashenko hasn't played a role here. But Lukashenko is somebody who always wheels and deals. He always maneuvers to get advantage. And given that you have yourself said that there's a crisis on your border, surely that is the right thing to do. Moving tanks, cranking up the rhetoric in this fashion is just pointless. If you were prepared to pay Erdogan to keep the refugees, pay Lukashenko to do the same. Of course, that will mean that you are edging away from your sanctions, but what correctly, as you correctly said, have those sanctions actually achieved? Lukashenko is still there. Belarus is still there. Belarus is fully now under Lukashenko's control and is integrating ever more rapidly with Russia. And that's what's going to happen even more rapidly if there's more sanctions. So if that's what you want to achieve, then you're going about it in the right way.
Yeah, so here are two suggestions. Suggestion number one is, I agree, Poland should not let the migrants in. It's not their problem, and they should secure their border, absolutely. Why doesn't Poland speak with Belarus? They've had very good relations, for so long, and then this whole Protasevich thing and the election, all of this stuff started and their relations soured. But, they were talking to each other, their neighbors. Why doesn't Poland just talk with Belarus and say, you know what, because all these migrants, this is going to be kind of silly what I say, but hey, because all these migrants really don't want to stay in Poland. What they really want is to live in Germany. I mean, that's where they want to go. There's no doubt about that. That's accepted across the board. They want to get to Germany. Why don't you just take them to Germany?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's where they want to go. Take them to Germany. Ursula von der Leyen is, she used to be the German defense minister, so I'm sure she's going to welcome them with open arms. Absolutely. Why wouldn't she?
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely. I mean, if the Poles were canny operators, that's exactly what they would do. They would say to Angela Merkel, well, you're the person who welcomes all the refugees. The refugees, as they claim themselves to be, they're not actually, but put that aside. These people want to come to Germany. You say you want them. Well, you can have them. I mean, we'll arrange for them to travel from Belarus into Germany, and it's not really our problem. Of course, Merkel would not like that. The Germans wouldn't like that at all. But then, by the way, there's a chance that something practical might happen. There might actually, in that case, be a German delegation to Warsaw and a German delegation to Minsk, and there might be some kind of agreements that things might be sorted out with these migrant flows. And that, by the way, might take the heat off the Poles to some extent, who've got all their problems, their problems with the EU, because they would, in that case, be in a position to say to the Germans, well, look, we're guarding your eastern flank. You've got to work with us. I mean, that would be a clever, intelligent policy. The reason the Poles aren't doing this is because they're blinded by their loathing of Russia. At least, no, I don't mean all Poles, by the way. The current Polish government is just fixated to a ludicrous degree with Russia. The leader of the Polish Law and Justice Party, Mr. Kaczynski, has convinced himself, no one outside Poland believes this, that the Russians murdered his brother when he was president. There was this plane crash on the way to Katyn, and he's persuaded himself that this was somehow Putin arranged arranged that crash to kill his brother. So he's got this obsession with Russia, and it's distorting Polish policy. It's making Polish policy go in all sorts of bizarre directions and off wild tangents, which make absolutely no sense from a Polish point of view at all. Poland should have good relations with Belarus. Poland should have good relations with Russia. The Russians would welcome good relations with Poland. No question about this. If you spend any time in Russia, you would know that the Russians, far from having aggressive intentions against Poland, want to make friends with Poland for all sorts of very good economic, cultural, historical reasons. And, remember, these are the two big Slav nations. They have much in common. There's a real possibilities there for making friends. But instead of that, what we get is this nonsense with tanks being deployed and talk about Mr. Putin playing five-dimensional chess and that sort of thing. And certainly they shouldn't accept the migrants. But I'm going to say something. This problem we have at the border at the moment is a minor one. The talk is that there's about 4,000 people there, which is, by the way, not vast numbers. This isn't a huge army of migrants. I mean, to compare that with the number of people who are crossing the southern border into the United States every day. I mean, this is not a huge number. There's said to be another 10,000 in Belarus, but we don't know about that. I mean, this is in its early stages. But in a few months, there could really be a crisis on the European Union's borders, because there are reports that following the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, millions of people are thinking of leaving Afghanistan and traveling across Central Asia, possibly through Turkey, possibly through Belarus and Russia, and they may be intending to come to the European Union. I was watching a BBC programme about this very topic just last night. A BBC correspondent talking to people, Afghan migrants, all of whom now want to come to Germany. And, this looks like, a real flood, whereas this isn't a flood. This is a trickle.
Yeah, all of this is done to protect Merkel in Merkel's 2015 disastrous policy. All of it is done to protect Merkel, because the last thing that she could afford to have, and that would tarnish her already tarnished reputation, would be to have thousands and thousands of migrants, just flood into Germany because she made that declaration in 2015 and that disastrous policy. But why don't the Poles and the Belarusians work together to send those migrants back into Turkey?
Well, indeed. Well, quite. I mean, so they should. I mean, this is the other thing. I mean, if it's correct that Turkish Airlines are playing a big role in this, and I'm told they are, then of course Erdogan, who has, by the way, excellent relations with Lukashenko, might be also he might be the real puppet master. And forget about Mr. Putin, who doesn't seem to be involved at all. But Erdogan is absolutely capable of using migrant flows. He's done it many times. So maybe you should be talking to him. Maybe you should be talking to Lukashenko and Erdogan and trying to find a way to stop this flood of people pouring into the European Union. As I said, it's a trickle at the moment. But come the summer months, after the winter, it could very easily turn into a flood. And then that could be a crisis on a far bigger scale than the one we're looking at now. And you need to prepare for that now. You need to have your defenses ready now. You need to have consistent messaging in Afghanistan with the Taliban, by the way, but not just the Taliban, but all sorts of people, to make it absolutely clear to people in Afghanistan that if they're thinking of moving en masse to Germany, they are not going to get there. The European Union's borders are closed. Germany's borders are closed. I would add that if there is a mass migrant flow from Afghanistan or the Middle East into Germany now, which as a result of that catastrophic decision, misjudgment, so it wasn't a misjudgment, catastrophic decision that Merkel made back in 2014 is a distinct possibility, then the entire politics in Germany are going to be completely upended, because there are now very complex coalition negotiations going on within Germany between the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Free Democrats, the Liberal Party. If there's a mass migrant flow into Germany, that coalition could very easily shatter, because the Free Democrats will almost certainly want to take action to stop this migrant flow. The Greens, because they're Greens, would probably take the same line that the Democrats do in the US, which is more migrants, please. Let's have more and more and more of them. And the Social Democrats themselves would probably split. And at that point, it's quite possible that the German government could collapse or break down. And then, of course, we might be forced into new elections. And in that kind of situation, well, the AfD would have an open goal in front of them. So it's if you're concerned about those things, then it seems to me that the time to take action is now, not get distracted by these episodes at the moment on the Polish border. And that means telephoning Warsaw and telling the Poles, calm down. This isn't, we're not in a war situation. And it also means striking that deal with Lukashenko, possibly with Erdogan too. That seems to me to be part of the sort of steps that you need to take. It also means taking other steps to tighten up your border controls, to put up border fences, and, dare I say it, this won't be popular, to do something about the Schengen rules as well, and to say that, this policy of saying that if somebody enters European Union territory, they can just move anywhere from one country to another as they please. When they're foreign migrants, that just isn't viable anymore, and it has to stop. And that means facing up to the reality that free movement is simply a utopian idea, and it should be abandoned.
Well, the free the free movement, when you have all these sanctions being doled out to other countries, is, I think, what poisons everything. Let me give you an example, and let me see your comments here. The Ryanair thing closed off the airspace of Belarus and essentially made it so that no one can fly to Belarus. A year ago, if I wanted to fly to Belarus, I could fly to Minsk, and I would get about, I think it was a 30-day, as an EU passport, I would get a 30-day visa-free entry into Belarus. I could stay for 30 days. There were a lot of flights where you could fly into Minsk, stay there for 3-4 weeks, and then you leave the country. Fine, no problem. Many flights were going into Belarus from the EU. That's a good thing, right? You have people are seeing Belarus. People from Belarus are seeing Europe. You're exchanging ideas. You're meeting people. There's a free, to a certain extent, a free movement of people there between Belarus and the European Union. Then comes the Ryanair incident, and now no EU airline can fly into Belarus. Not one. They can't even fly over the damn country, right? So what does Belarus do? This is just how I'm looking at it. They increase the flights and the traffic from Russia into Belarus. Where else can you fly into Belarus from? Well, you can fly into Belarus from Turkey. So let's just get more flights coming in from Turkey to Belarus. Well, on those flights, what do you have? More and more migrants. So what the EU could do, and what the Poles could do with Belarus is simple. Look, forget these dumb sanctions. The bottleneck is not in Belarus, it's in Turkey. The bottleneck, the problem is in Turkey. So what do? Let's get rid of these sanctions. Let's open up the airlines again and the flights again and the connections again. And Let's decrease the flights from Turkey into Belarus. Problem solved. Maybe Belarus, maybe Lukashenko, von der Leyen could say, maybe Lukashenko, maybe you may want to not have such an easy visa from Turkey into Belarus. Maybe you want to put restrictions there instead of Belarus to Europe, because it benefits Europe if their goal truly is to try and move Belarus away from Russia. It benefits Europe to have more interaction with Belarus. That means more flights. So what about that? I mean, that's a viable solution.
It's an entirely viable solution. It's an entirely sensible policy. Isolating Belarus, isolating its people, is not going to make them want to join the European Union. It's going to make it more difficult for them to do that. It's going to reduce interactions between them and the people of the European Union. And of course, it does something else. It punishes them. It metes out a collective punishment. I mean, whatever, if you're trying to liberate, as you claim, the people of Belarus, I mean, I put the word liberate in quotation marks again. But if what you're doing is you're trying to liberate them, then it's a very odd way of doing it, to make it impossible or extremely difficult for them to travel to Europe. I mean, in fact, it doesn't make any kind of sense. It suggests that instead of trying to liberate them, you're trying to imprison them in some way. I mean, that's how it actually looks. But of course, they don't really want to talk to Lukashenko about these things, even though these would be the entirely sensible things to do. As I said, pay him some money to house the refugees or migrants, let's call them migrants, as the Russians say. Open up the airspace again so that there's less incentive to send flights to Turkey and to have flights to Turkey. Introduce visa restrictions or some kind of restrictions between Belarus and Turkey. All this is very sensible, very proper, very practical stuff. But doing that would admit that Lukashenko is there to stay and that he is the government of Belarus. And when your priority is either to overthrow him or to pretend that he's going to go from one day to the next, then you can't bring yourself to do that. So the result is you have all this nonsense instead. And it's just a classic example of regime change, fixations, getting in the way of what should practically be done. Can I stress again, if ideology is what's driving you, if you're not thinking in practical terms, then you're going to sacrifice your true interests and ultimately the interests of your own people in pursuit of these agendas, which are just leading you nowhere. As you absolutely rightly say, the interest of the European Union is to have good relations with its neighbours. The interests of Poland are to have good relations with its neighbours, to ensure control of its borders. But instead, because of these crazy policies, that's not happening.
Yeah, and I hate the fact that the European Union, they know that their policies are crap. They know that they messed up, and all of this is their fault. This is the fault of the people at the headquarters in Brussels. All of this is going on right now, but they always throw it on human rights and EU values and the dictator Lukashenko and all of these things. They always throw shade at that. They always try to cover their asses because they have implemented, and they're going to continue to implement with more sanctions, dumb policies that don't benefit the Polish population. They don't benefit the European citizens. None of it.
Absolutely. Now, look, let's think about a situation where these decisions were being made by sovereign states. Let's say it was Germany, Poland, all these countries made those decisions. They were completely, they weren't accountable. They weren't part of the union. They were making those decisions by themselves. Of course, in those situations, political leaders accountable to their electorates and conscious of how their electorates feel would be making practical and sensible decisions. But what you have instead is a situation where decisions are being made by a bunch of incompetent ideologues, apparatchiks in Brussels, who, because they are not part of any genuine political system, of any national political system are completely unaccountable. Ursula von der Leyen can't be held to account by any electorate anywhere for the way she's messing this sort of situation up. So she's going to go on repeating her mistakes because, on the one hand, she is every bit as incompetent as you say, but secondly, because she is an ideologue. and as an ideologue, she pursues in a single-minded way these disastrous policies which states are then forced to abide by.
Yeah, and this is such an easy problem to solve.
Absolutely.
It's so simple.
Absolutely. It's a trickle. As I say, at the moment, it's a trickle. Heavens knows, as I said, when we get hundreds of thousands, or let's dare talk about it, millions of people coming from Central Asia, from Afghanistan, well, then you really will have a crisis. And what are you going to do? Deploying tanks to your border isn't going to help you much, because tanks aren't really suitable for this problem. And in fact, they don't even address the problem in any coherent way.
I'm sure they'll just blame Russia and Lukashenko.
Yeah, I mean,
well.
because that is the easy, ideologically correct thing to do. Blame Putin. Say, he's the mastermind, the spider at the center of the web who's controlling everything because, he's got some 20-dimensional chess game that he's playing, which, as I said, nobody can explain or understand. He's weaponizing this whole situation in order to destabilize the European Union. In what way, to what end, for what purpose, nobody can say.
It's almost hard to figure out who's more incompetent, the EU and von der Leyen and Michel and these guys, or the Biden White House. It's every day I'm struggling. Which administration is more incompetent? These guys in Europe or the guys in DC?
Well, I would say that it's such a close run thing that I'm not going to make a choice. On one thing I would say, and this is an important difference, is that for all the chaos and muddle and incompetence and bungling in Washington, the United States is a country. It's a nation. And you see, you have elections there, and well, there are all kinds of problems with elections, which we're not going to discuss here. But you still have you have an outcome like an election in Virginia, for example, which makes a difference. You have real politicians, real political figures can function in the United States. In the European Union, that is becoming impossible because at the very center of power and decision making, you have a bunch of people who are unaccountable. I mean, there is no control. There is no external control over them. Putin once made a point. He made a very astute point, by the way. He said even the Soviet Central Committee was more accountable for its actions than these guys are. Because, there was always power struggles going on there. But if you appoint Ursula von der Leyen to this post as president of the European Commission, there's no mechanism. There's no easy mechanism to get rid of her. She's there and she's going to go on doing what she's doing. And she's got all the power that she has to go on making mayhem. So that's where we are.
I wonder what form of government is the European Union? What are they? A dictatorship? Authoritarian? Politburo? I mean, how would you define the European Union? Because they're not elected. It's not democracy. It's not a republic. It's not even a kingdom. It's not even a dictatorship. It's hard to say. What are they?
I think you've actually put your finger on the problem because, of course, all those systems that you've described function within sovereign nation states. What it is, and I think this is the way we must understand it, what it is what some people want to make the world into. From their perspective, it's the shape of things to come. It's a supranational body, unaccountable, incapable, but also extraordinarily powerful in all sorts of ways. But because it's not based on not anchored on any nation state, it's both impossible to define fully. I mean, you can't really define it in conventional political terms. And at the same time, it makes it incredibly difficult because it's so undefinable, indefinable, to actually mobilize against it. Because what you're coming up with is something which, in some respects, has no substance, even though it has enormous power. It's a very, very bizarre institution, a very bizarre entity, something that's never existed before in human history.
It's very dangerous, and it's
Oh,
destroying
absolutely.
nation states.
And it is, absolutely. I mean, look at the state of Europe. I mean, we were talking about it. You're somebody who I know takes great interest in culture, in arts. Think about Europe in, say, 1960. How many great artists and writers and musicians and poets and composers were working then. I mean, we had that, Picasso was still there. There were all kinds of people doing amazing things. There was, extraordinary music. There was, classical music, which I take a great interest in, great orchestras. All that was going on. What is Europe producing that is comparable today? I mean, it's a cancer which is gradually eating away at the heart of European culture, European civilization, as it homogenizes and disrupts and destroys everything.
All right. We'll leave it there. The Duran.locals.com, and go to ODYSEE, BitChute, SuperU, and Rumble. You'll find all our videos there, and go to the Duran shop, 10% off when you use the code REALNEWS. You'll find that discount down below. Take care.